Abdurrahman, how does this resonate with your experience, both, personally and the experience of your member organizations? We've heard about, how to wrestle with these difficult dilemmas, the difficulties organizations, will inevitably experience in having to answer questions of these types, and then, more generally, the impact that the legislation has that, Dustin and Naz have spoken about.
I think for us it's even more challenging because if you look at the potentially affected situations that Naz was talking about, seven of those situations out of 8 were actually Muslim majority countries. The only one is, I think, Colombia. And so access to those areas and to where prescribed routes are is very difficult. And actually, we have evidence to show that Muslim NGOs can access where others cannot access. But the problem is that before even delivering the aid, there's already an eye of suspicion on us, right? These guys going into an area with the Muslim majority, proscribed groups and so on, and so people are already scrutinizing us before we even deliver any kind of aid or sort of. And so what it shows is that actually where some are accountable, have to show how they manage risks, we have to be doing more than that, right, and be the best at doing so. And some agencies are actually at the forefront of it, and people talk in the sector, for example, at Islamic Relief being one of the top agencies in terms of risk management and accountability and how they assess the risks on the ground. But also, looking down at the paper, what I thought was very, very interesting is also the dynamics of the banks that Tom is going to talk more about, and which actually takes a comment from the State Department, Treasury Department, saying that actually banks are a very useful tool for us to tackle money laundering and abuse and so on of the sector. But I'd say also that they've done a very good presentation. I think the paper is very clear on how the situation is and what one has to take into consideration. But also it's important, looking at the UK context, to understand that actually the situation is even more complicated than it was before when these things happened in 2001. In 2001 you probably had Al-Qaeda, but now you have ISIS and Shabab that came out afterwards. And so I believe that the assumption of policymakers is that actually these regulations somehow didn't work because other groups came up and created themselves, and that we need to be tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher. And what you've seen as a change as well is that initially you had a situation where Muslim agencies thought that they were particularly affected more than others, but now actually you have a situation where it's everyone, Muslim or not, who works in a context where there's a humanitarian emergency, who works in a context where there are high incidents of proscribed groups. And I think I would agree with what Naz is saying, that actually we need to engage, and the donors need to engage on managing the risk and sharing the risks of operating in those areas. But the challenge is that the media is looking highly at this, right? And the reputational harm, you're looking at this. So the donor might engage with you, but as soon as the media takes it and highlights that, it will immediately retract from that as well. And so you have those dimensions of the being accountable to the public that one has to manage.
And I'll come back to you on the reputational harm, but you touched on the impact on banking and financial transactions. And in a way, this is probably the area we've explored the least so far, in terms of the analysis of the impact of the laws and measures on if you want, the functioning of humanitarian organizations, the ability to operate normally. Tom, you've been looking at this. Can you comment on what Naz and Dustin and Abdurahman have raised as a fundamental issue?